Erev and good evening. I'm here with some trepidation. First of all, because all of us are waiting for dinner. Secondly, because I want to thank the association for inviting somebody who is neither a lawyer nor a jurist. And I feel very much in a minority here. The lawyer in our family is my wife, who unfortunately couldn't come here tonight. So I'm used to being a minority, and that's fine with me, so thank you very much for this invitation. The issue of anti-Semitism, once a Jewish state would be established, has been an issue which appears marginally, but significantly, in the thinking of most Zionist thinkers. One of the first Zionist thinkers, Moses Hess, a socialist, a friend of Karl Marx, who published in 1862 a book called Rome and Jerusalem after Italian independence, in which he said after the independence, the liberation of the Holy City on the River Tiber, the time has come for the liberation of the Holy City on Mount Moriah, coming from a very secular socialist. And he believed at the end that once a Jewish Commonwealth will be established in Palestine, in Eretz Israel, it will be such an example of social justice and of progressive ideas that it will be a model for the whole world, and therefore anti-Semitism will sort of disappear. Leon Pinsker, Auto-Emancipation, in his book Auto-Emancipation, 1882, didn't directly address the issue, but he believed that the anomaly of a people without a country, which is really the Jews, once it will disappear, people will start looking at Jews as normal people, some of whom live outside their homeland, and like Italians living outside of Italy, and the specter of a ghost nation without a land will disappear. Theodor Herzl, in his 8 years between 1896 and 1904, when he died at a very early age, the 8 years of his Zionist activity, because he was a political journalist, a political editor, a playwright, had a much more sophisticated and nuanced view. Despite what some people are saying about Herzl, he did not believe that once a Jewish state will be established, anti-Semitism will disappear. But he said, once a Jewish state will be established, Jews will not be defenseless anymore. There will be somebody who could defend them, not necessarily militarily, but in the court of public opinion. And I'm going to come to this at the end of my comments. I'm going to divide my comments into two parts. I want to relate to you two very different episodes in the complex issue of Israel as a Jewish nation state and its relationship to the Jewish people outside of Israel, and then say something very general and theoretical dealing with the law of return, which is one of the core issues of the relationship and responsibility of Israel as a Jewish state to the Jewish people living outside of it. On one hand, Israel feels responsible for Jews outside the country. On the other hand, everybody realizes that there are limits to the way in which you can carry out this responsibility in the real world. And this has really changed over time. And one of the things that one has to realize is that Israel started in 1948, barely surviving the onslaught of all its Arab neighbors, as a very weak state. Even after winning the War of Independence, Israel emerged with more than 1% of its population being killed in the war, not all of them military, many of them civilians, with masses of immigrants, impoverished immigrants, first of all Holocaust survivors from Europe, and then refugees from Arab countries. It was a very weak country, barely surviving and its options were very limited. So when you look today at one of the more interesting relationships that Israel developed in 1947 before its establishment, in 1948, with the Soviet Union, you can see the dilemmas. On one hand, the most significant military, not only diplomatic, but military support Israel received in 1948 came from the Soviet Union. And this was the Soviet Union of Stalin, one of the greatest criminals in modern history. But if it wouldn't be for the arms supplied via Czechoslovakia, at Stalin's orders in March and April of 1948, not only the road to Jerusalem would not have been open, maybe Israel would not be able to survive. So in my book, I can imagine at the last judgment, when Stalin will stand before the court of whoever is sitting in judgment on the last judgment, and there will be a bill of his crimes read to him, and the crimes are incredible. There will be perhaps a small Jewish lawyer who will say two things in mitigation, not in defense, because Stalin cannot be defended. First of all, at the end of the day, it was the Red Army that liberated Auschwitz and the other extermination camps in Eastern Europe. And secondly, that it was Stalin who helped the Jewish nascent state survive at a time when Western democracies, Britain didn't really care, France very problematic, and the United States under President Truman recognized Israel, but clamped a arms embargo on all sides in the Middle East in a very neutral way, which really hurt the Jews much more than it hurt the Arabs. So at that time, people in Israel and in the world Jewish community in Israel knew already that Jewish writers and Jewish activists in the Soviet Union are being persecuted, that the way in which during the war Stalin supported the anti-fascist Jewish committee headed by Ilya Ehrenburg was disbanded, that some of the people were in jail. And not that there was an evident decision not to relate to those things, but it was very clear that on one hand, yes, you could have criticized, possibly, Stalin, but at the other hand, the very existence of the State of Israel was at stake. And it might, and some people even today criticize Israel that in 1948 it didn't speak out against Stalin. That's very nice in an academic seminar. When you are responsible for a nation fighting for its life, some of the choices are problematic. Fast forward to 1976, and this is from my personal experience as Director General of the Foreign Ministry at that time. At that time, Argentina was under a military dictatorship, a very nasty one, which executed in an extra-legal way thousands of people, socialists, liberals, communists, many of whom, some of whom were Jewish. And the United States at that time clamped an arms embargo on Argentina, which indirectly affected Israel because previously Israel signed an agreement with the Argentine government of exporting some arms to Argentina. And Israel decided to follow the American example and stopped the arms shipment. This was a situation when a number of HaShomer HaTzair, a young socialist Zionist organization in Argentina, were arrested in Argentina, including a number of madrichim, instructors sent from kibbutzim in Israel. So this became an issue between Israel and Argentina. And not only were a number of Jewish, socialist, communist, if you will, Shomer Tzair people arrested, but also a number of madrichim from kibbutzim in the country, and obviously the government, of which Mapam, Shomer Tzair, was at that time a member, were very much concerned about safety and life. We were able at that time to do something which was never really described in detail. We found ways through a number of Jewish people in Argentina who were close to the generals, to the military dictatorships, and tried to intercede on behalf, first of all, of the Israeli citizens and also of some of the Jewish people arrested, many are Shomer HaTzair people. And we were told by the generals that, well, if you stop the embargo on arms delivery to which you have been signatories, maybe something can be done. So this was discussed in the cabinet, in the committee of the cabinet, when the challenges were very clear. On one hand, it was a life and death issue for a number of Israeli and Jewish people in Argentina. On the other hand, the United States would criticize Israel. And at the end of the day, there was a decision that we have a responsibility and we are strong enough to make the decision on our own, overlooking whatever the United States in terms of human rights policy, which all of us support. However, here there's a life, death and life issue. To those of you who follow Israeli politics, let me add a fact that we were under enormous pressure from the press. Why doesn't the government criticize the Argentina dictators? Why don't we do this and the other? And at that time, there was an institution, informal, called Va'adat HaOrchim, a committee of the editors of main Israeli newspapers, which was an informal institution, but allowed government officials to speak really off the record to the editors. And we decided to convene a meeting to which two people addressed. One was the head of the Jewish agency, Yosef Almogi, almost totally forgotten, not a great historical reader, but a very smart and influential politician at that time of the Labour Party, and myself as head of the Foreign Ministry. And we told the editors that it's a complex issue. We are negotiating to find ways. We didn't mention the arms business. We are negotiating, and we hope that within 48 hours we can make sure that the Israeli madrichim, as well as some of the Jewish prisoners, will be freed. What we are asking of the editors, give us 48 hours. And they understood, and within a day and a half, the madrichim were freed. Some of the Jewish prisoners were freed on the condition that they immigrate to Israel and that we make sure that they're not going to get out of the country for some time, which probably the Supreme Court would not accept today. We were criticized by the United States, but not too much. And it suggested that when you have political power, which Jews did not have for 2,000 years, some of your choices are not so simple. It's not between good and bad. We made a deal with bloody dictators. We didn't speak up and we did not criticize the dictators. We even thanked them for the ability to free some people. But we saved lives, and we saved Jewish lives. We didn't save the lives, and we didn't ask for the lives of people who were not Jewish. Not easy. And I think that one of the responsibilities of statehood is to realize that you have to make choices not between good and evil, but sometimes between different kinds of evil, and you have sometimes to make compromises. You have to make compromises with your own consciousness precisely because you have a goal. And the goal is to try to help as much as you can, not absolutely, Jewish people, which leads me to the law of return. The law of return has been criticized, and it is even criticized in Israel, as being discriminatory. In a little bit of kind language, some people are saying the law of return is preferential regarding Jews compared to non-Jews. It is discriminatory. Yes, it is an immigration law. All immigration laws are discriminatory unless you say the country is open totally, as the United States was open until the 1920s. But no country is totally open. And when you look at immigration laws, most immigration laws in democratic countries, I'm only talking about democratic countries, have one basic function. The function is to try to have an immigration law which will be to the best interest of the population of the country itself. And then you may have quotas for refugees, humanitarian cases. But you look at a country like Canada, one of the most democratic, multicultural countries, which has a very generous refugee policy. But unless you're a refugee and you want to immigrate to Canada, or humanitarian reasons, you either have to have a certain profession which the Canadian society and economy needs, or you have to show some considerable fortune which you can prove that you are bringing money to Canada. This is legitimate. The law of return is very different. It does not start with the interest of the citizens of Israel. It starts with a mission. And the mission is something which I think we have to internalize precisely because we're using language which is perhaps sometimes problematical. Never again. What do we mean by never again? Let me suggest to you that the law of return is the encapsulation of never again. Never again will there be a situation in which Jewish people will be either persecuted or expelled or threatened or feel uncomfortable in a country, and they will not have a country to go to. This was one of the major tragedies during World War II. The Holocaust is the Holocaust. But the fact that during the war, the British Royal Navy or British Royal Air Force pushed back ships that were trying to reach Palestine from Europe, and people were pushed back, and others couldn't come because they knew what was happening. Struma, Patria, things like this. This is a shame on the consciousness of Western democracies, and never again will Jewish people be in a situation in which they will not have a home to which they could come if they wish. So, rather than be defensive about the law of return and say, yes, but we should be proud of it. It is a law of solidarity. And let me just add that some of the Jewish socialist communists who were freed from Argentina and came to Israel, after a few years, they went back to a change of government in Argentina. Some went to the United States, and one of them became also a very vociferous critic of Israel. That's fine. We can live with that, precisely because we are strong, precisely because we have a responsibility and we are aware of the limits of our responsibility. One final word. In order to have a much deeper relationship between Israel and diaspora, and with the Buzi Herzog here, I'm not going to try to bring out all the elements. Let me just bring one. A lot of people outside of Israel, even if they do not agree with the policies of Israel, have always been proud of the leaders of Israel. Chaim Weizmann, Ben Gurion, Moshe Sharet, Chaim Herzog, Menachem Begin. You might have agreed, they might have agreed with the policies or not, but they were proud. One of the most important tasks for Israeli citizens today is to make sure that no Jewish person outside of Israel or inside of Israel would be ashamed of our leaders. This is something very political, but very moral, because we are living in a world which is a glass house. And if I may emasculate or perhaps correct a verse from the Bible, Sefer Bamidbar, I think it's chapter 34. Let me start with the Hebrew quotation. אנחנו לא עם לבדד ישכון. אנחנו בגויים נתחשב. We are not in people living apart, and we are counted among the nations. This gives us a responsibility which is not only political, not only moral, but also deeply invested in Jewish history and in the fact, and this is why the law of return is one of the cornerstones. Let's hope that there will never be a Jewish community anywhere that will feel so uncomfortable that it will think only Israel is the answer. But if this will ever happen, this is why Israel was established. It was established not only for the people who lived in 1948 or live today here, they and the children and grandchildren, but also for every Jewish person outside of Israel. We are not the Jewish nation state of the Jewish people all over the world. Most Jews outside of Israel do not want to live in Israel, and I respect the feeling, and we should respect the feeling because it's an open world, and we should not force our Zionism on other people. But I think many of them know that at the end of the day, there is a horizon somewhere in the Orient, which is also theirs, and we should all be proud of it. Thank you very much.